Michael Penix or J.J. McCarthy? Who's the better draft prospect in this class?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. So Lars, as we see more mock drafts and as we kind of get around to just the whole season of there's not a lot to talk about in the NFL world outside of prospect debates and so on and so forth, because that's its whole own show. Michael Penix has started to kind of fall down people's boards for reasons that seem to be outside of medicals, while some NFL evaluators have J.J. McCarthy moving into the top 10. We had a very extensive conversation about J.J. McCarthy leading up to the national championship. We heard a lot from Michigan fans saying, oh, you're underrating J.J. McCarthy. You're underrating him. And, you know, judging by his performance in the national championship, yeah, they won the game. This is not discrediting that in any way, shape, or form. But you kind of look at the two quarterbacks and their overall body of work, and you look at what Michael Penix has had to do. Some of the knocks on him have been his unorthodox throwing motion, you know, where you might account some of that to being a lefty, while J.J. McCarthy seems to have these, oh, well, we really like his mechanics. He can do X, Y, and Z. Whereas when you look at the body of work in terms of statistics, who knows that J.J. McCarthy could throw for 400 yards when he's not asked to drop back and throw it 45, 50 times. But it just feels like Michael Penix, for one reason or another, is kind of getting lost in terms of some of these top draft quarterback, top quarterbacks in this class.
Right. I mean, every year there always seems to be one or two guys that, you know, hey, how did so-and-so fall? Like, how did, you know, again, the easiest one now is how did Lamar Jackson fall, right? Where there's, you know, the famous Gil Brandt, oh, he should be a tight end or wide receiver. It's like, hey, how about now? Like, should I still be a tight end or wide receiver? It's like, not everybody and that's the thing that
not bad for a running back.
Right, exactly. And well, the thing that gets me when you look at Penix and you hear some of the knocks, like, okay, I could kind of accept the medical, right, which is not the case, right? But
sure,
if somebody's like, hey, like, you know, we're just still a little iffy on it. Just we see he was fine the last couple of years, but we still know he had multiple injuries in Indiana, so we're kind of hesitant. His delivery is not slow, because I mean, when you go watch him in pretty much any game in Washington, he's got to get the ball out quick. In terms of that snap decision, like you could see the longer delivery, but it's not the Tim Tebow wind up and baseball throw.
No, you're right. So one of the knocks that, you know, shout out to some of the guys over at PFF on the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, where one of the things that they discuss when it comes to that is he has a little bit of a long release sometimes, where the ball comes out of his hands with incredible velocity. That's not like, his arm strength is not a question at all. But one thing that they discussed when it comes to a little bit of the differences between the two is McCarthy has a little bit more of an ability to throw on the run than Penix does, where when you talk about pocket passers, there's no contest. Michael Penix is far and away the better prospect. But when you look at, you know, where some of these guys are going, I'm of the belief that we're going to see 5, maybe even 6 quarterbacks go in the first round of this upcoming draft, where you look around and you see Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, Drake May. They're probably going to be the top 3 picks. There's a very solid chance that happens. And then that in turn is going to push other guys up the board, whether it be Penix, whether it be Bo Nix, whether it be J.J. McCarthy, where the more you listen to some of these guys that are plugged in, like Daniel Jeremiah, Dane Brugler, Lance Zierlein, some of these guys who seem to have a very good idea of what they're doing when they're placing guys, where that's more of a, this is what I'm hearing over what I believe kind of selection. Seeing J.J. McCarthy at the most recent mock draft from Daniel Jeremiah go at 8th overall to the Falcons, that's fine. If that's going to happen, all right. But I just feel that Michael Penix should not be lost in some of these conversations where, you know, in some, he might be falling out of the first round, where other guys are going to be pushed up the board as teams want to go get their quarterback. And then outside of that, looking at Michael Penix's arm talent, looking what he does on film, he has some of the best film in this quarterback class.
Yeah, when he's got the biggest hand too. So I think, again, there's a lot of small things that kind of work in Penix's favor. And when you think about what truly makes quarterbacks successful early on in the NFL, it's their experience, right? Now, sometimes you can say, hey, a guy's only played 2 or 3 years. He's still 21, 22, like CJ Stroud, right? Where you're not thinking of him as like a 24, 25-year-old like Penix, but he has that maturity to play above his years. Penix is a guy where you don't necessarily have to play him right away. But if you're a team between 25 and 32 and you have a quarterback who you might not want to have for the next 3 years, Penix would be your guy, right? Because to your point, you go back and look at the arm talent, you look at the arm strength, you look at the understanding of offenses, how to throw guys open, right? To your point. Yeah. Penix might not throw on the run really well, but he can throw somebody open from the pocket, which I think if you're in the NFL, you'd almost rather have that, right? Because when you have better coaching I'm not saying better coaching compared to Bohr and Grubb, but I'm saying when you have better coaching in the NFL, more likely than not, all you need to do is you're playing point guard. Look at Tua in Miami, where can you get the ball out? Can you just get these guys to play? Can you get your playmakers the ball? And that's exactly what Penix does. So if he goes to a team that's got a decent offensive line, that's got some decent receivers around him, that's actually a better landing spot for him. And I know it's not,
right.
Everybody wants to go number one. Everybody wants to go top 5, but usually those teams, look, Anthony Richardson, he's not, he got hurt. It's all, you could be a top 5.
He looked good before he got hurt. I'm still really high on him, but sorry, no, go ahead.
Well, because I'm really high on him, but that's the thing. Just because you can play right away or not, or things like that. But getting the right guy in the right system, that's why I highlighted Richardson, where you could Penix could be that guy where maybe he falls into the 20 range, but he's going to a better fit and system.
So I get your point. Somebody might trade up for him. There are a whole lot of things that could happen, but when you just look at this overall debate between the two, the one thing where I've kind of seen some more knocks on Penix recently is throwing over the middle, where they're saying, all right, well, he doesn't do it very often. There are 90 attempts or whatever it might be. And I feel like that's something where he wasn't asked to do it very much. That's more of a product of the system than it is anything else, where I'm not going to, this is not me saying that Michael Penix is a product of Ryan Grubb's system. It helped him a lot. But Mike, obviously, now that he's healthy and was able to do these different things, got to showcase his full talent. But you see he wasn't really very willing to throw over the middle of the field. I think that's just kind of what he was asked to do, because when you have guys who can win one-on-one on the outside consistently in Rome Odunze, in Jalen McMillan, and Jalen Polk, you don't necessarily need to do that, combined with Grubb's just willingness to want to take deep shots over and over and over again, that it's just not necessarily a huge part of what you're being asked to do. And then on top of that, I think that he's very willing and very able to be coached into getting better at throwing on the run and doing these different things where, people will talk about, his passer rating, his completion percentage isn't necessarily very high when he's throwing on the run, where, and when he gets out of the pocket, of course, it's not nearly the same. And that's coachable with the amount of arm talent that he has. But another thing that you can talk about is that's also something that was coached, where if it's not there and Michael Penix has to get out and roll and do some of these other things, Ryan Grubb said, we're more than okay with you throwing the ball away time and time and time again. That's okay. A throwaway in our offense is not a death sentence. We would much rather you do that, and obviously in most cases, than try to force a play downfield, or even sometimes try to force it to a check down, where we've seen guys like Jack Westover and Devin Culp not, have a lot of room to run. And instead of, 2nd and 8, Michael Penix is more than willing to make it 2nd and 10 instead, where, those 2 yards can be helpful, but if you're going to throw the ball again, the 2 yards isn't going to make a huge difference in the long run.
Right. Well, I think what's the one thing that, in terms of a good indicator in that regard that you can point to Penix, when he misses far. He misses over. So if he's going to give his receiver the shot to make it, maybe you have to make a heroic catch, or no one's getting it. It's going out of bounds. I think that's the key with Penix, where he doesn't. We can probably count on both hands the number of bad decisions, like truly, truly, truly bad decisions that he made in his time at Washington.
And all those bad decisions came down to one thing that we've discussed before, and we're definitely going to be discussing more on the show as the draft moves along. That's confidence in his arm, where he says, all right, I've made this throw before, I'm going to try to make it again, but sometimes into a tighter window or in a different area of the field, so different things might happen. And with that being said, Washington is starting to set some official visits in 2025. So let's get into a few of those guys. right after we send a message to our good friends over at Game Time, because Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With a killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Some of the best things about Game Time is it's so easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area, and you get a view from every single seat in the venue, so you know exactly what to that you are going to see when you get to the game before, or whatever event you might be going to before you buy. You can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps, because Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Right now, all Game Time users can use code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Just download the Game Time app and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. And when we talk about recruiting, we got to give a shout out to the best recruiters in the biz, and that's our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs, because when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the hiring process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, make the process even easier and quicker. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockdowncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So we're seeing a lot of recruiting news coming out over the last couple of days, and there's some official visits being set. We saw a couple of prospects from Arizona. One that I know we've discussed on the show before is Raiden Vinesbright, a 3-star on 247, a 4-star on On3, who recently transferred to IMG Academy and has gotten a lot of interest from both Washington coaching staffs, being Jedd Fisch's staff and Kalen DeBoer's. He got offered by Alabama after after that staff moved over there. And that's one guy who I'm really curious to see how he would fit in this offense, because he's got really, really nice speed on the outside.
Right, exactly. And I think it's going to be symbolic, because there's going to be a lot of guys that Kalen DeBoer's staff targeted that are now not holdovers per se, but the Jedd Fisch's staff are also going to want to target. And I will say, maybe not to back end caveat that narrative that we were building about the board, but they were kind of doing some recruiting at 25. So they laid.
Yeah.
To be fair, we got to give a little bit of credit, right? To say that they did lay the foundation, because if they don't lay the foundation on any of those kids but still have the success on the field, Jake Flores doesn't visit, Rainsbright doesn't visit. There's a number of these kids who have already been on campus before, at least for an unofficial visit or for a game. Sure. Again, both are unofficial visits, but I mean an unofficial non-season visit and an in-season unofficial visit for a game. But getting some of these guys, and that's the thing, is they're mixing it up, right? You see guys from the West Coast, guys from now with
Vinesbright going to Florida, yeah.
Exactly.
Going to IMG.
Right, well, I was going to because that's the one that caught my eye. It's not that we did. I always knew he kind of had talent and he looked like a good prospect, but now making that next jump, I think is going to be massive for him, get his game. And if you're Washington, if you're Kevin Cummings, and you can build that connection, even with him going to the East Coast, I mean, because that's, I don't know if you remember Jaden Woodby or Jaden Lars. Back out of Moscow. When some of those guys, when they go to the East Coast, it's, hey, I really like this school on the West Coast. I really like this school on the West Coast. And then you hear from Georgia, Florida. You kind of start piling up all the SEC and ACC and Big Ten schools that are on the East Coast. And it's like, now it's going to be harder to battle. But if you're Washington, if you can win early and get that relationship going, which it sounds like they are, that's a good sign long term.
And that's the thing where he's already got some of those offers, where he was getting those while he was at Corona del Sol, where Michigan offered, Florida offered. He's got an official visit set up with Notre Dame, where he's got a lot of big time offers. And one guy who hasn't set up an official visit yet that I know you and I are both really interested in is tight end Bear Tenney that goes to Lehigh in Utah. And he's somebody who's got a massive offer list. We were just going over it before the show. Georgia, LSU, Michigan, USC, you name it, they're probably on that list. And that's really impressive from a guy who started getting those offers as a freshman or a sophomore. And he's somebody who just seems to be very interested in the program and has been for a while, where he is just a really big projectable body. And something you and I have discussed previously on the show is that there are only 3 scholarship tight ends on the roster right now. So taking 2, maybe even taking 3, where that seems like a lot, where depending on what the spring transfer portal ends up looking like, there's a possibility that you could take 3 high school tight ends and not necessarily, feel the brunt of it for a year or two, or a guy transfers out. Maybe somebody really impresses and you find ways to make that all work. But that's somebody where I'm really curious to see how his recruitment plays out with some of the offers that he's got.
It's absolutely banging on the Jordan Pow gavel. Because I mean that's the one thing, Pow. I don't want to say he got a bad rap for it, right? Because he would always have one tight end that was always solid, right? But I think now with the evolution of Jedd Fisch, maybe hanging around an NFL guy a little bit more, no disrespect to Chris Peterson or even Steve Sarkisian, who initially got Jordan Pow back on staff or brought Jordan Pow to Washington. That was something where I think we've seen the evolution of Pow at Arizona to where now he can coach multiple tight ends to that level, right? Not just Tanner McLaughlin, not just a Will Dissly. It's also going out and getting some of these marquee 3-star guys. It's not just, hey, I'm going to go get, I love Ricky
XYZ.
Well, I should say this. I love Ricky McCoy because Ricky McCoy was a defensive lineman who was converted to tight end, right? And so that's somebody where, okay, you can see the athleticism, but now you're at Washington. Now you got a marquee NFL program to market. Go get a high 3-star. Go get a couple of 4-stars in back-to-back classes, and then go get a really good tight end in the portal.
Right.
And I think that's kind of what the plan seems to be, where Noah Flores would be the other tight end, kind of obviously in the mix. He hasn't, I don't believe, scheduled an official visit to Washington, but he's been on campus. But has been on campus multiple times, so that likely could be a take. But then you want to take more than one, right? So now you're getting Bear out of Utah would be a significant addition, and then you can kind of let that third guy be one of either Tiandre Weverly or insert X tight end. But now you have 2 solid options going forward, so that third one becomes more of a luxury than it does a need.
And especially if you want to talk about a guy like Tiandre Weverly, who's one of the top prospects in state in the class of 2025. He's a 4-star prospect where he's a really impressive athlete, but it doesn't look like he's nailed down a position just yet where, I'm sure there are people who are saying, well, hey, you don't want to throw in a name like Tiandre Weverly where that's, a premium take if you can get a guy like that. But when you look at just his film compared to some of the other ones, somebody like Bear Tenney or Noah Flores might play ahead of him. Well, you can use a redshirt year on Waverly and just say, all right, this is somebody we're going to develop because we really like all the intangibles, all the tools that he has, but we want to see it develop a little bit more on the field before we throw you out into a bigger role. And with that being said, let's stay in the state of Utah here for another guy who has set an official visit for looks like the end of June, and that's Darius Afalava, who's an interior offensive lineman. The Huskies have already taken one in this class in Jake Flores, who I know you and I both really like, where Afalava is another guy like Flores, where Flores has a bigger offer list, but so you see some of those same names on his, where he's a 4-star on the 247 Sports Composite, and he's got offers from Michigan, LSU, Oregon are all in the mix. And when you look at a guy like that, that's another one where you just want to stack bodies because he's 6'5", 320, plays tackle, but looks like he might move to the interior, and getting those big projectable bodies in the room where you like his talent on film, but you look at his relationship with Brennan Carroll and you look at what he could possibly turn into. And that's a guy who would be a premium take for this group.
Yeah, I'm looking at his profile photo. There's a name that played at Washington that just, you look at his, I don't think it's MJ, but there was an offensive lineman. You kind of just look at it, almost looks like the exact same carbon copy. But the reason why I say that is because when we're saying, oh, hey, there's a 3-star kid in Utah, but it's got Michigan, go look at what Michigan's done with some 3-stars. Go look at what other schools have done with these other 3-stars. And it's like, I think fans need to kind of accept that, hey, if we're taking a 3-star Utah kid, that's different than a 3-star Montana kid or a 3-star Wyoming kid. There's different kind of levels to this. So I think I wouldn't be too worried about, I think when you look at the side, it's 320, that just kind of screams guard to me. So it's one of those where if you can plug and get a bigger but still athletic offensive line, that's exactly what Brennan Carroll wants. And kind of to your point about Jake Flores, as I wrote out inside the Huskies, you can go check that out, can play basically one of 5 positions on the offensive line. So it's not like you're saying, oh, hey, Flores is a boom tackle or a boom guard. He can do both, but it's one of those, that's why you take that commit first, so you have flexibility with your other targets in the 25 class.
Right. And then on top of that, when you talk about Afalava, he lives in Utah now, but he's actually originally from Hawaii, where he played a lot of his high school ball and looks like he moved out there somewhat recently. So that's another thing where Washington hasn't necessarily done too well in the state of Hawaii over the last couple of seasons. And some of Chris Peterson's best recruiting classes were built through Hawaii, or of course, California, Washington, Arizona were big parts of that as well. But Hawaii was a state that, it's usually a hotbed of talent that hasn't necessarily been utilized to its fullest potential over recent years, and getting back into that state in a big way would be really big for the staff. And it seems like that's something they want to prioritize. But Lars, we're bouncing around a little bit today. Let's talk about who you think Washington's biggest sleeper in the draft might be. Right after we send a message to our good friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook, because you can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. And speaking of shooting your shot, I know FanDuel has got some, we're probably going to get into it more as we get closer to the draft, but some futures on, first quarterback off the board, first receiver off the board. Rome Odunze first receiver. Well, we've talked a lot about Marvin Harrison. Might not be a bad bet as the first receiver off the board. All right, Lars, top sleeper from Washington who's got 13 players invited to the combine. It could be one of them, could be somebody who didn't get invited to the combine, somebody that you haven't necessarily seen a whole lot of in terms of mock drafts, just media hype, whatever it might be. Who are you going with?
So that's a caveat here, right? Because when you look at that list of 13, there are a lot of 3 and 4 year starters. There's a lot of guys so there's no sleeper in the sense of, hey, he kind of had a couple starts here and there, but he's a good guy for the program, like Rich Newton, right? For example, there's there's a different level of sleeper there. So I want to go 2. I want to go one side on each of the ball.
Okay,
Jack Westover, because again, a story with 2 high school football games in his career before playing 4 at Washington. And I think when you look at the position of tight end, he can do so many different things. And you look at the NFL, a traditional, where it's like, oh, wow, I don't even know where that guy is, but he's making great plays. It's like, it's kind of the nature of the tight end position at this point. Defensively, I know this isn't as much of a sleeper, so hear me out on this. Edefuan Ulofoshio. Because, again, I think with respect to where he's being targeted and graded and things like that, because, I haven't seen a ton of, day 2 grades on him. There's been a couple here and there, but I think he's the guy where, again, as long as he can stay fully healthy, right? Because, when Kalen Staff came in, there was the offseason injury and things like that. But when he's played lights out. He's played at an all-conference level. So I think if he's able to kind of stay healthy and get in the right defensive scheme, I could just imagine him being just a true inside linebacker at the NFL for 5-10 years. It's just one of those things where, because he's got so much potential and so much versatility, and even if anything, he can start on special teams. So I think there's a number of positions that he can play, and I think his kind of veteran leadership and experience, like someone's going to want to pick him up.
So I like where you're going with that, especially when you talk about Eddie, where, we see a lot of linebackers be really successful after getting picked later on, where that's a position where it's usually plug and play. And you talk about him where he's a 6th-year senior. You're right. He has a lot of experience on special teams. He's somebody who you don't necessarily have to worry about, especially when you talk about his football IQ, where you can just plug and play him in any defense right away. And wouldn't be surprised if after some of the injuries he suffered, he is a 4th or a 5th round pick. You can throw him in the middle of a defense and just say, we trust this guy to do some good work for us. Where one guy that, I look at where he was a later round pick is Nakobe Dean, Green Bay Packers, where I think he ended up getting picked in the 3rd round. But when you look at some of the stuff that he's been able to do, he's just still been hyper productive after, having some injuries, but being a Georgia alum, it's kind of in the same vein where I'm not comparing Washington and Georgia by any stretch of the imagination, but you just look at his production, you look at what he's been able to put on film over a couple of years, and you say, this is a guy that we can roll with. This is somebody that we trust. So mine are a little bit of hot takes in terms of sleepers, where I also have one on both sides of the ball. On offense, I have Roger Rosengarten, where I like where you're going with Jack Westover, where, he might not test at the combine with the torn calf that he suffered before the national championship. But when I think about Roger Rosengarten, I think about somebody who has really impressed so far during the draft process. And it's somebody where I can't wait for, in a couple of weeks from now, we're going to get some draft media people or somebody who's just gonna be like, oh, why haven't we talked more about Roger Rosengarten? He was Michael Penix's blindside protector. He didn't give up a lot of sacks. Yeah, he didn't play well in the national championship game, but he's been really, really impressive outside of that. That whole hype cycle is going to happen where I don't know if it's going to push him into the 1st round. I don't think it will with the amount of talent that this offensive line class has. But he's somebody where, maybe he's a mid-second round pick, wherever he gets picked, because it's probably going to be on day 2, where, we're going to look back in 2-3 years and it's going to be the same discussion where, oh, wow, look at how solid of a pick Roger Rosengarten was for insert XY smart team here, like the Baltimore Ravens or the Pittsburgh Steelers or whoever it might be, that just really good and really consistent with making just solid, productive draft picks. And this is an anchor at right or left tackle for this team here, where he's just solid, productive, somebody you don't have to worry about, and is just really good at everything it is that he does. And on the defensive side, I'm going to go with Braylon Trice, where I think that with the way he's fallen out of some mock drafts where I saw he was picked 54th overall in one not too long ago. You look at just where he's starting to fall right now, and you look at his production. You look at everything else that he's done for this team over the last couple of years in terms of his motor, his willingness to play against the run, not taking snaps off, and leading the nation in quarterback pressures for each of the last 2 seasons. That's a guy who, if he falls to the second round, I referenced the Steelers, the Ravens in the last one. Like, look at the Ravens did a couple of years ago, just picking David Ojabo, where he hasn't necessarily panned out just yet, but that's something where you look at that pick at 45 overall and you just say, oh, how did this guy fall to this team at this pick? Like, this is insane. Kind of in that same light where people are starting to really get a lot higher on Chop Robinson, Penn State, Jedd Fisch. And I'm not including Laiatu Latu or Dallas Turner in this conversation, but there are guys where it seems to be they're starting to overtake Braylon Trice in this on some people's boards. And then when you're going to look back on it at the end of the day, it's, oh yeah, no, this makes sense as to why Braylon was more productive than half of these guys in the NFL.
Right. As you were saying that, I mean, I wonder, because I can't think off the top of my head who else was drafted, but Budda Baker was the 33rd overall pick. So there was some teams that felt 3 or 4 other safeties were better than Budda, right? And so similar to Braylon Trice, where it's like, okay, wait, you're really going to pass on Budda? Like, I understand he's not like 6'2", 220 like Cam Chancellor, but like the man makes plays. And I think obviously look at the success Budda Baker's had in the NFL, right? We're multiple NFL contracts, second contract, big extension raises, things like that.
Yeah.
Braylon would kind of fall into that same mode. So that's why I'm intrigued by both your names, because in my head I'm like, well, Roger, to me, like, I guess perception could be a sleeper, right? Because people are talking more about
that's kind of where I'm going with that, yeah.
And Troy Fautano is getting first round mocks, whereas Roger's getting second round mocks. It's like, okay, Braylon, I think it's more or less just the disrespect, right? The because he didn't have 20 sacks and whatever. But to be fair, neither did the 3 other guys that we're talking about. I can't think Jedd. Again, the whole Florida State thing aside, like Jedd is good, but I've told you from the start, I've never been as high on him compared to Braylon Trice. The other 2 you mentioned, Turner and Latu, different discussion. So I think this is another draft where if Braylon somehow falls to the early second round, we're gonna have discussions next year after the season's over. How did he fall so far? It's like, well,
yeah.
And you're asking the wrong guys, because we were saying he should have gone higher. Like,
and that's the point where even if he gets picked in the early 30s, like that's fine. Yeah. Where if he's a high second round pick, okay, this is a really deep draft. There's a lot of talent in this draft, but he's just somebody who just seems to have gotten lost through a good portion of this cycle, which is fine. This is just what happens in the draft every year. As we open this with Michael Penix versus JJ McCarthy, where one of them won a national championship, one of them was the runner up for the Heisman Trophy, where there's going to be a certain point where you're splitting hairs with some of these guys, but just with Braylon, this edge class is very interesting, where Dallas Turner has really exploded late. Some people might, vary on Laiatu Latu due to his medicals or due to some other things. And then beyond that, it just becomes a bit of a, what's your flavor, where Jedd Fisch can be really good when he's on, where some people had him as a top 10, top 15 player if he came out in last year's draft cycle. Chop Robinson, I'm not super high on. I understand why people like him. It's the same thing with the intangibles, but Braylon possesses all those same qualities. Plus, you don't necessarily have to worry about him taking plays off, where I know it's become a very, where Eric Schmidt called him Max Crosby to me when we were talking down at the national championship, where he's the guy who, he's going to play through everything. He's not going to take plays off. He's going to play the run with the same intensity that he does the pass. And you can't say that about every single player that plays that position in the NFL now.
Right, exactly. I think that's the thing is you can't replace the battery, you can't replace the motor. I think that's you can teach hand fighting and things like that, but Braylon, and that's the other thing. Remember just talking to him over the last couple of years. He's just a guy where it's like, you know what? I finally fell back in love with football, and now like all I want to do is just play football. It's almost in a way kind of like Nick Bosa, right? Where it's like, hey, look, he's just a football guy, just a guy that's keeps himself pretty simple, but just wants to get after quarterbacks and just wants to eviscerate offensive linemen. So I think how you don't take that guy is beyond me.
No, I agree with you. Where that's kind of the best place to wrap up this discussion is this is going to be a really interesting draft cycle. And with so many Huskies to talk about, like some of these guys might get lost at a certain point. And just with the combine coming up next weekend, maybe some of these guys will rise where we could be coming on this show at the beginning of March and just saying, oh yeah, it's no surprise that teams are really starting to gush over a Braylon Trice or a Jack Westover or Edefuan Ulofoshio or whoever it might be, because they had this chance to finally get out and prove themselves where, you know, sometimes you get lost in the discussion of the Roma Dunzes, the Michael Penixes of the world, where it's, oh yeah, these are, you know, just big notable names in the world of college football, where some of these guys aren't producing in the same light, but they're still really talented players. And Lars, with that, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support, and we've got some fun stuff in the works for you. So make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day, so please make sure you stay tuned. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell so you get a notification every time we publish a new video. And like the video, leave us a comment down below if you're audio only. Leave us a 5-star review, as it all does really help us out. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Thursday.